Hello, welcome everyone to a Halloween edition of Responsible Tech Talks. Today I have with me Rayna Monforti. Rayna and I met through the AI Leadership Institute, which, if you're not familiar with that organization, it's essentially a group of folks really committed to responsible AI who get together on a regular basis. We share ideas and resources, and Rayna and I bonded over our shared kind of product management perspective on AI, and also kind of approaching AI with a human-centered sort of perspective, a consumer insights point of view. So we immediately sort of hit it off, and Rayna was kind enough to join us today. So welcome.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for inviting me.
Wonderful. Well, would you mind giving a little bit of an introduction to yourself and sort of your work in the AI space? You have a lot of considerable experience of actually building and deploying AI-enabled systems, and I think would love to hear a little overview of where you're coming from.
Sure. So I have been in the product space for the last 10 years. I've focused in primarily on B2B insights and analytics products across multiple industries with a heavy focus on consumer packaged goods, retail tech, but also have a lot of experience in the heavily regulated space.
Mm.
And then really the last 4 years or so, that journey in product has led me to building AI enabled products utilizing machine learning, natural language processing, and then more recently, generative AI. But I think what makes my approach to product maybe a little more unique, I think everyone has their own different approach to product, is before I got into product, I had a whole career in consumer and shopper insights in both the consumer packaged goods space and in the food service space. So I bring that with me into product.
Yeah, which is awesome. I think it's a very interesting experience, and I know we're going to dig into that a little bit more. But I wonder off the top, just to kind of do some table setting with respect to the AI-enabled software that you've been building. What's really cool is that you have seen this evolution from maybe more, I'm going to say, traditional
Mhm.
AI to generative AI. But I know that those terms are very confusing for a lot of folks. We throw out, oh, it's AI, but AI means a lot of different things, and it's been around for quite some time. So I
Right.
wonder if you could just help educate us a little bit as to like what we're talking about in terms of your experiences. What's natural language processing, machine learning? What are those key differences?
Yeah, so I think I'll start with generative AI because I think that's the type of AI that people are most familiar with. I mean, if you think about it, it's your chatbot. It's having conversations, and the AI will give you feedback. A lot of people talk about generative AI being probabilistic versus deterministic, and
Mm.
those kind of sound like big words, but when you think about more traditional approaches to things like analytics or even a product, when you build a product, you always expect the same outcome. And so if you feed in certain information in, if you have something that's logic based, it'll give you the same output because it's always following the same rules.
Mm.
With generative AI, depending on the day, how you write your prompt, that you could put the same thing in, and the AI is going to come up with a different type of response, and that's what makes it probabilistic, which makes it really different from a product standpoint, but also just helping people trust it because if you're expecting the same output every single time, that's not what's going to happen.
Mm.
And we can talk more about that later. Natural language processing is really more about language and semantics. So it's helps to kind of I would do a couple things really well, and I've used it in sentiment analysis
Mm.
primarily.
Mhm.
So it'll actually like analyze the language and then tell you, oh, is that paragraph, that sentence Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it neutral? Does it have a mixed sentiment? And you can glean a lot of different insights about that from that information. It'll also helps you take that language and divide it into common themes and topics.
Hmm.
So I worked on a product that was a sentiment analytics suite, and that's exactly what it did. And it was in the product review space. And so it helped the users of that product understand if there was something wrong with their product, they could easily identify it because it would surface up common themes and topics. Or if you had a product that was struggling, you could search for all the negative reviews really, really quickly because you could filter on that,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, no, that's a great explanation. Us user researchers love to do sentiment analysis. So, yeah,
That's fun stuff.
yeah.
And then machine learning it's a little bit more formalized, and I think most AI that you've seen up until recently really has probably been more around machine learning. Basically, it's heavy on the training piece, and it uses language to kind of make very specific decisions, and you could do very specific things. So, I mean, I'll give an example
Mhm.
of a specific product that I worked on, but it could be used for many, many different applications. I used it in a review moderation product.
Hmm.
So, normally we would have just humans look at the reviews, and they would look at the reviews, and there were 17 different observations they had to look at. Was there profanity? Were there any legal concerns? Were there safety concerns? Was it relevant? Those things like that. So what we did was we trained a model for each of those observations. So the model would do a very specific thing. So
Hmm.
one of the models was around relevance. And so because we were able to feed in millions of older reviews that we already had labeled relevant
Hmm.
versus irrelevant, it would actually learn. And so it would do very specific things. So, machine learning is good for something very specific like that. It's good for recommendation engines a
Mhm.
lot because it helps you understand different personas and what they like and don't like. You can use it in combination with generative AI now and do a lot of different things. It doesn't have to be isolated, but that was kind of the big area in AI. And then, before that, and I never used to think of this as AI, but
Hmm.
it actually is AI, is kind of just anything that you're doing that's very logic based.
Hmm.
That's actually artificial intelligence because it's making decisions
Hmm.
on doing things. So a lot of the products before I officially say I was in AI actually were AI, like um, just generating alerts based on a set of rules and conditions.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. I think I love
Yeah.
that those examples are very easy to like wrap our minds around. I think very familiar. So thank you for painting that picture
Yeah.
because I think we often just to use the painting metaphor, we paint with these broad strokes and then we lose the detail. And I am curious, as you have seen generative AI enter the scene, and I think, and feel free to disagree, but
Mhm.
in some ways it's kind of overwhelmed the conversation around AI because the default mental model I think that we jump to oftentimes is the generative solution, but
Yeah.
as you've talked about, the outputs there are non-deterministic, and that's meaningful for product managers. So I wonder how you think about mapping the technology that's most appropriate to the need and the problem that you're trying to solve. Like, what do product managers need to
Mhm.
know to really select the right tool for the job?
Yeah, I mean, and it all starts, and you're already kind of talking to it. It's like, what problem are you trying to solve for the user? And so, not all problems can be solved by AI, nor should they be. So, I mean, that's the
Mhm.
first question. It's like, okay, we want to do X. We want to come up with ideas for marketing messaging,
Mhm.
right? Okay, so that's great. That's a problem that can be solved. How can that be solved? And one of the ways that can be solved is with AI. Okay, and then when you're thinking about AI, well, would be, something good for that. Well, because you don't necessarily want the same marketing message every single time, generative AI tends to be very good for something like that. But let's say you were wanting to always come up with the same response every single time, well, then maybe you would start looking at machine learning,
Mhm.
or I mean, there's deep learning. There's all these other things that I don't know as much about.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, when you're getting into like things like healthcare and you're wanting very specific outcomes every single time and you don't want to leave as much to chance, that's when you're going to want to use something more like machine learning.
Mhm.
Um, and if you're wanting to know more about like how people feel about something, that's where like the natural language processing comes in.
Mm.
But you also might be thinking about using some of these things together if you want the AI to do multiple things and actually take an action on your behalf. That's where you get into agentic AI. One of the things I just saw earlier this week is Walmart has started launching a new product, and they have a partnership with ChatGPT.
Mm,
And
mhm.
so basically, I don't know if this is in their app or on the website. I haven't had a chance to dig in too
Mhm.
much, but users directly interact with the chat and ask questions about products. For example, I am planning my meals for the week. What should I buy? And the agent will then go and look for those products and then show the user recommendations and help them evaluate and make decisions. And basically, you have the whole shopper journey now happening in one spot, because then they could also go and make that purchase right there using the AI agent. So you're using multiple things. It seems like it's a
Mhm.
combination of generative AI and agentic AI all for that solution, and maybe some natural language processing in there for the reviews and pulling up the
Mm.
review sentiment.
Interesting. That's a great example. I'll
Yeah,
have to link that in the comments, that article, because you're right. I haven't dug into it either, but that's a nice way to show it's not either or, but it really demands, I think, as you're implying, understanding the problem and that journey. What are the
right.
steps? What is necessary to fulfill the goals that the user has? In large part, the business as well has goals, but there's that picking the right tool to get at each of those pieces.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, what I think it sounds simple enough, and I think being oriented in the same way you and I get it, but I suspect you've run into this as well as I. It's not always easy to persuade people to
No.
be problem focused. Yeah, isn't that? I find that surprising. So, I don't know. Do you have any observations or perspective on why it is that having a problem based sort of mindset can be a tough sell at times? What have your experiences been?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense when I think coming from, where you and I come from, really from that kind of product space and really thinking about that. But what starts happening in organizations, especially when you're talking to leadership, they just want things done quickly, and they don't necessarily think about, oh, wait, let's we want to build AI because AI is, the trendy thing.
Mhm,
And we need to get 5 AI products out by the end of the year. Figure out what to build and build it quickly. And that's not necessarily the best way to approach things, because if you just build AI for the sake of it and you're not paying attention to what users actually want and what problems they're trying to solve, you'll put something out there, they won't use it, and you're not building that trust with between yourself
mhm,
and your users and your customers. And I think, you know, I think the C-suite in particular might be they've got to they're thinking about different things. They're thinking about revenue, they're thinking about what their board might be saying. They're getting all these external pressures to generate revenue and increase the bottom line, and they tend to forget that the customer is sometimes the most important thing and the most important person that you should be caring about. And it's tough too with cross functional stakeholders.
mm,
Sales has
mhm,
revenue goals. Your operations team, they have to get things done in a certain amount of time. And so having all of those things align sometimes they don't make that connection to why
Hmm.
it's important to solve for what the user actually wants. Because they
Yeah.
just assume that the user wants what they want, and that's not necessarily the same thing.
It makes things easier and faster when you base your assumptions on
Exactly.
that premise. Yeah. Well, so I have probably about five different directions I could take this because there's so
Okay.
much in your response, but maybe starting with how have you reconciled some of these competing and maybe
Yeah.
misaligned goals as you've had to shepherd products between and amongst all of these stakeholders to get things to market? What things have you tried that seem to be generally successful? And yeah, just what's your experience been?
Yeah, it's really about, I mean, what works for me and what works for me isn't necessarily what's going to work for others,
Mhm.
is having one-on-one conversations with stakeholders to really start understanding what their pain points are, what their goals are. I've been in an org where I was actually leading a bunch of initiatives, AI and non-AI, and they were all different products with different stakeholders who had very different goals and needs, and some cared about the product A, but didn't care about product B. Some only cared about product
Mm,
C. But yet I needed to put together a roadmap and align on all of these things. So in this case, I did a big group exercise where I asked all stakeholders, across the org, there were over 20 people involved,
mm,
to help me understand what their goals were for the year and see how I could tie them to what the product goals were and make sure that at the beginning of the year we were setting it up so we were all tracking towards the same goals.
mm,
Because if you have different goals, you're going to also have different definitions of what success is.
mhm, mhm,
And so once we were able to align on the goals, we were able to start talking about priorities and what needed to be done. What was the biggest need for for our users, for the products. And because I was able to kind of put that together I put it together in a quantitative way
mhm,
to help them understand, we were able to have a qualitative conversation around why these things mattered. And because even though, stakeholder A didn't care about the product, they really understood, oh, we need to do this product because it's a huge pain point for users and it'll really help us get our revenue earlier.
hmm,
Um,
mhm.
so, yeah, our top priority product ended up being an onboarding product, which wasn't AI.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
but it was taking 120 days to ramp up and onboard
Wow,
customers. And
really?
we needed to improve that. And if we just could improve it to 90 days, we could now see revenue a month earlier.
Wow.
So we had legacy systems. It was kind of a nasty thing.
That's
So
always,
that
yeah.
took priority over some of the AI initiatives that we wanted to do because but didn't mean that we wouldn't layer in potentially AI into that onboarding process. It just
Mhm,
depended on what would come because again, we weren't looking for AI solutions. We were trying to figure out what the biggest needs were, what
mhm.
the problem was that we needed to solve, and then you figure out how you solve it. And AI may or may not be part of that.
Yeah, I'm impressed you were able to get to consensus. Sometimes that alone can be a challenge, and you might expose the goals, and then how does it really, yeah, how do you get that focus on a particular direction? Did
Yeah,
you find that difficult?
it was very difficult, but I pulled together. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the RICE framework for
Yes.
prioritization.
Mhm.
Yeah. So RICE, for people who aren't familiar, it and I'm gonna probably blank
I
out
always
some of
forget.
the
It's
letters.
reach,
Gonna blank.
impact,
Reach,
yeah.
impact, confidence,
Mhm.
and effort.
Yes. Good.
Right.
Yeah, we did it together. We
Yay.
pieced it. Yeah.
And so, kind of having that process and conversation, and would basically have a call, and I would break out with each of the individual teams and go through each of those metrics for each of the
Mm,
products on my list. And there were about 20 different products and features and enhancements and things that we wanted to do, and laid them out and shared what I had as a baseline, and then said, hey, do these things make sense to you? And I would get feedback, "Oh, no, you know what? the impact here is gonna be much bigger than you're thinking. And I actually kind of expanded on the RICE framework where I looked at internal impact versus external
Oh,
impact
ooh,
because I
interesting.
thought that gets into like, here's what this is really important for the business, but customers don't care about it and vice versa. So the things that were important to both, obviously that number when you do the calculation would rise.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so
Ooh,
being able to
interesting.
have those conversations, and because I had all those conversations when I came back together with the full team, there was only a couple questions,
Hmm.
because they understood where everybody was coming from because I'd had the conversations with them. And what was great about that is because that worked really well. I had some of leadership on that call, and
Mm-hmm.
they asked if, hey, can you train the other product teams on how to do this, and the engineering leads and the product leads. And so we
Mm.
started using it throughout the whole organization because they saw how well it worked. But again, I like to have the one-on-one conversations. If you were to do that in one big room with 20 plus people, you would not come to
Yeah,
consensus.
yeah, facilitating rice is hard too. It's so you get into some minutia and yeah, it can be difficult, but yeah.
Exactly. And one of the things, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with Dr. Marilyn Nika.
No.
She
Mm-mm.
is in the AI space.
Mm.
She was an engineer who went into product, and she has really been doing a lot of teaching on AI. She wrote a book that came out earlier this year, and one of the things in her book, and I can't remember the book's name right now,
Mhm.
um, was taking the rice framework but expanding it, and
Hmm.
so to be the rice A framework.
Okay.
So it would be you would have the reach, impact, and certainty,
Mhm.
and then you tend to you divide by effort will be effort now
Mhm.
plus or effort times AI effort because
Oh,
all the things that you
smart.
need to do around AI are different than what you
Mhm.
need to do from the product standpoint. And I wished I had seen this framework before I had started working on kind of my first generative AI product.
Mm.
Um, because when we were talking about effort, the effort to build in the infrastructure, the UI components for the user to utilize the AI is a very different thing than what you need to do to build and train the
Mm.
AI and verify that the AI is working. They're very different things, and they used very different resources.
Yeah, and how you assess, particularly with generative AI, what does a good output look like? Are you getting, are the guardrails in place? What should the guardrails be? I feel like it's a whole different
Yeah,
set of conversations to be had there.
Exactly, and I think if I'd been able to really show that
Mm.
more easily, it would have helped my conversations with leadership because they couldn't understand why it was taking so
Yes,
long to
yes.
build. And it actually, in this case, it wasn't the AI piece. It was
Mm.
all of the underlying infrastructure to get the data in place, to get
Yes.
the infrastructure set up,
Oh my
to be
gosh,
able to
wonderful
scale.
point.
Yeah.
I was actually thinking of this when you were talking about ROI and the need to move quickly. I'm like, this is not necessarily the best solution for moving fast either.
No.
There's an investment piece. I love that, right? Say I'm going to have to link to it in the notes, but yeah, that's very real. And I
Yep.
also love from this is sort of, I guess, a research or strategy perspective, but and maybe
Mhm.
a little of an aside, but I kind of have a rule of thumb. Like, I don't like to go into a room where I'm doing a workshop where I haven't talked to almost everyone individually ahead of time. I think it's so important to know what you're walking into to curate the conversation properly. So you're not doing discovery in front of the whole room and
Right.
you just hard to manage. So I think that is really smart. Plus the qual quant combination. You grounded the conversation in some quantitative
Yeah.
data, but as you said, you expose the quality because that reality really matters. I think, like how people feel about a particular thing or why they have a particular rationale, and that's not apparent in the numbers alone.
E
So,
exactly, and that way, because you got that qualitative feedback on the numbers, you could share that back if somebody had a question, and I
mm,
usually had a little thing off to the side with some notes that might have
mm,
included,
mm-hmm.
um, "Hey, this might give me a low rice number, but here's why it's important."
Ah, excellent. Yeah, makes total sense. Love that.
Yeah.
And then again, there's like so many tentacles into other topics, but one I want to highlight. And if folks have not looked at your LinkedIn contributions, your posts, I really encourage them to do that because I always find every single thing that you post to be of value and very thoughtful. And one of the things that you recently wrote about was the dangers of over indexing on outputs versus outcomes. So
Yes.
I don't know, how do you have, I mean, and again, I'm like, well, yeah, but this is not reflexive for lots of decision makers. So, how do you explain the difference? How do you get buy-in for that approach? I just am curious if you would say more about your perspective on that.
Sure. I mean, so that particular post I think that you're referring to was inspired by I attended an event here in Chicago about kind of the future of building product. And so it was something that the panelists were talking about, but I also know I tend to talk about that a lot in my previous posts as well. And it was about that conversation we were having earlier about that need to move quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the one thing, that I think trips people up is outcomes are easier. I'm sorry, outputs are easier to measure
Mm-hmm.
than outcomes
Oh, for
because
sure.
it's really easy to measure how many documents the AI is generating or how many you know uh, marketing recommendations it makes, right?
Yeah.
Or the number of AI products and features that you're coming out with for the rest of the year. That's really, really easy to measure and really easy to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but outcome is it's much tougher because you really have to think about the user and what matters to them. But outcome isn't just about the user. It's
Mm-hmm.
also, about the business. What does it matter? What matters to the business? And it's also about trust.
Yeah.
And so, like, you need to think about for your product, which of those things matter, and what do you want to measure? And I think the trick is you don't have just one thing that you're measuring. You
Mm-hmm.
want to measure multiple things because, your CEO is going to care about revenue or cost savings.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but your sales team, your customer success team is really going to care about, you know, if if you're meeting the user needs.
Mm-hmm.
Are you getting something to them more quickly? Your operations team, are you able to help them with their job, and are you able to measure that? And then if you're not building that trust, none of those other two, the not those other measures don't even matter because if people don't trust your product, they're not going to use it, and you're not going to get the revenue.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I have been holding on to this question to get us into the topic of trust because,
Sure.
again, you write about this a lot. And again, this is just my perspective, but I feel like we have such a deficit of trust in so many respects,
Yes.
particularly in product and with our relationship with, the organizations we do business with,
Yep.
that it seems to me that it's such a core foundational thing that is eroding such that it's really hard to build value without that foundation in place. Like that, at least that's my intuitive sense. I am very curious to hear your thinking on this
Mhm.
topic of trust, which is huge. You just described building trust sort of internally so that it has this kind of external benefit that customers can read whether or not
Mhm.
folks are oriented toward building trust or not, and it shows through. But I don't want to put words in your mouth. I just would love to
Oh,
hear,
sure.
yeah, how you think about trust and why it's important.
Yeah, I mean, so I do think about trust in those two ways. There's that internal trust you need to build in order to make sure that you've got buy-in, that you're building the right thing, and that you're measuring the success properly. You also need that internal buy-in because if you are, and my responses do tend to skew a little more B2B, but if
Mm-hmm.
you're a salesperson, you're customer success, and you need to sell that product or talk about that product, they need to believe in that product. And if you
Mm-hmm.
don't have that trust built around that before launch, it's going to be tough to get your users to trust it.
Wow, even before
So,
launch. That's a, yeah, interesting note. Yeah, on the
right.
B2B
Yeah,
context. Mm-hmm.
right. but this hits more in the B2C context or in the B2B to C. If you
Mhm,
have an end user, actually B2B as well,
mhm,
they're building trust in a different type of way. They're using the product. Does it provide the output that they're expecting? Does it do what they do? And so there's a few different ways to approach that. One, are you building transparency into your product?
mm,
So, do you have documentation or are your marketing talking about what the product can do, what it can't do, how the AI is making decisions? If you're using an agentic product, when as a user do you have control and when can you let the AI just do things for you?
mhm,
Um, when in your product are humans involved? Does the
yeah,
AI make all the
mm,
decisions or does the AI come up with everything?
mm,
Or does a human get involved when it gets ambiguous or tricky?
mhm,
Um, and really being clear about that because I think for a lot of users, understanding that no, humans are involved here is helpful for them,
yeah,
especially on things that are um, tricky, ambiguous, or when you're getting into, healthcare, health tech, you're
mhm,
making a life or death decision and a doctor is using something related to AI, they want to know, well, how is that decision being made? Is the doctor evaluating it before you're getting that recommendation?
yeah,
So it's all of that. And then the other thing that's important is providing a feedback loop.
mm,
So
mhm,
either something built into your product or a way for the user to contact your sales team. And it could just be as simple as you're using some type of generative AI product, and you can the user can give a thumbs up or a thumbs down for the output. It
mhm,
could be just that simple. Um, for my first kind of big AI product like that I launched, which was machine learning, I didn't think ahead enough in time to layer something into the product, nor because I was building on some legacy tech, it would have been a big lift to
mhm,
add that in pre-launch, but it was on my roadmap for
mhm.
post-launch. Um, I basically created a spreadsheet that's a very low tech,
Wow,
but
yeah,
it was a shared spreadsheet where customer success or our moderation managers, because it was a moderation product, could ask questions and bring in examples. Hey, the output of the moderation wasn't what I was expecting,
hmm,
right? And that way, the moderation manager could actually check it against how a human would moderate it and see what happened. And I actually started that process before launch because a lot of problems with moderation are actually human error. And
mm,
so one of the things that the AI was gonna do was make it more consistent, and it was
ah,
trained off of humans. So if the
mhm,
humans were gonna be wrong, the AI was gonna be wrong, but it
yeah,
would really start exposing that. And it was interesting because a lot of things are subjective, but there were also a lot of things that the humans definitely were getting wrong.
hmm,
Or, "No, no, no, this is actually correct, and here's why." But it would
mm,
allowed for that transparency and a feedback loop, so not only our customer success team, but users could get more comfortable with it. So when customer success went back to them with the feedback, they were able to share, "Oh yeah, thank you so much for letting us know about this. We took this back to the team and we're going to retrain the model." Or,
ah.
"Oh no, this is actually correct and here's why."
I really love that you shared that example for many reasons. One of which is I think a lot of people are contending with legacy systems, and it might
Yes.
feel impossible or difficult, expensive, or whatever to put in some of these human in the loop, if you will, processes. But you've just demonstrated with some intent and some careful thinking, like you can find a way, and I love that you thought
Absolutely.
about that. And if you didn't get it out of the gate, we iterate, but at least we have the intention of
Right.
going in of that, and I think that's a wonderful example.
Thanks.
I the other thing I hear when you talk about trustworthiness, I translate it in my mind a little bit to accountability. I think
Yes.
about if I'm giving feedback or knowing as a user that there are humans doing certain things. In my mind, I'm translating this to someone's owning whether or not this is working for me or not. And I wonder if that's an element of trust that you see being important as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I meant to mention that. So, yes, accountability is huge because that transparency helps show the accountability.
Mm,
And
mhm,
having that feedback loop provides that accountability and it really shows you, what's going on. I mean, I think the other thing when you're talking about building trust, that gets into are you also building responsibly and that will be displayed in that transparency. And I know responsible AI can be a loaded word.
mhm,
um, but, are you being, uh, are you bringing bias
mm,
into the model? Are you thinking about the global impact of your product if it's a global product? And are there regional and ethnic differences between how somebody or might respond to a situation? So, what somebody might think of as profane, for example, might be
mm.
different depending not just by region, but just even by company, which
Hmm.
that was actually very true
Oh,
in my
interesting. Yeah.
example.
Huh.
But we actually let our users, our customers have control over that. So it was another
Oh.
layer that they could add on there where some
Hmm.
customers where just saying the word darn potentially could be profane, or others
Mm.
if you were a company that sold, like a Spencer's Gifts, for
Mhm. Oh,
example,
yeah.
you needed to be able to say some of those words because they were actually the names of the product.
That's hilarious. That's a wonder. I love that example. Never would have thought of that one, but that's what
No,
I'll
it
refer back to.
it came up a lot.
Oh,
So,
interesting. So you gave that control to the users to calibrate it to their own,
a
case. Yeah.
right, we had our
Mm.
company standards, but then there was a second layer of moderation that
Mm.
would happen on the customer side if they chose to do it.
Okay.
They
Interesting.
didn't have to,
Mhm.
they could just accept our moderation, and we were very transparent about how we were moderating and in what would be approved or not approved, because the goal was to get as many reviews out there as possible, so if something got a one-star review, that didn't mean that we wouldn't say recommend to publish it. We actually highly recommended against them taking it down because that got into US regulations around what you
Oh.
should and shouldn't do with reviews. So,
Oh, I was just thinking about trust. Whenever I see all 5 stars across the board, I'm like, "Nah, this is this is
well,
fake."
we actually, my company did a lot of research on that.
Mm.
And for products that had 5-star reviews, consumers trusted less in that product than something that maybe had a 4.3
I
because
could
you
believe
could see that there were negative reviews there. So you would lose that
interesting.
trust in the company and the product, but more in the company if you weren't seeing if you were seeing all star 5-star reviews, you would actually question the integrity of the company.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I wanna go back to something that you mentioned and probe it into it a little bit more. I think I agree with you when you said responsibility or
Yeah.
responsible AI is a
Yep.
loaded term.
Yes.
I think I agree, and I think, in just to share my, thinking, I believe it tends to communicate maybe some ambiguity that threatens to, pump the brakes, as it were,
Yes.
in the process. So I think there's a little bit of maybe skepticism from that perspective. It's such a broad term, and maybe that just feels like, oh, we're going to get into some quagmire that we can't get out
Yes.
of. But I don't know if that's what you mean. I am curious where you've seen that term be greeted with a little bit of, maybe skepticism.
I think it's actually greeted with a lot of skepticism, and as soon as people hear it, they think, "Oh no, this is going to add 3 months to the process,"
Yep,
and
just speeding it. Mhm.
right, and because they're not thinking about they're thinking about all the things that you might have to do to be responsible, and you need to look at all of these things. So I actually, started getting that pushback and
Mm.
realized you can't just talk about responsible AI. You need to talk about it in terms of the user and what it means to the business. And it comes back to that trust conversation. So
Mm,
I tend to layer and use, whenever I'm talking about responsible AI, I actually use the language around trust
interesting.
because
Mhm.
and if you don't build that trust into your product from the beginning and it's part of that is building it responsibly.
Mhm.
Um, and it's really, really difficult once you launch a product to go back and suddenly build in all of those responsible elements
Yeah.
and you've already killed the trust. So
Yeah.
then you're also working on that as well. So you have to be very conscious what you absolutely need to do
Mhm.
before launching to have, a product out there that consumers are going to love and they're going to use versus, you know what, it would be nice to address all the, this is a really bad example, but all the
Okay.
bias that might be in the product
Mhm.
ahead
Mhm.
of
There's always
time.
bias, right?
Right. There's
So,
always
yeah.
bias,
Mhm.
but you need to, if you're transparent about, hey, there might be bias because of X, Y, and Z, but you're being transparent with users about that, and then you're providing maybe a score along with the results that are coming out of the AI, and maybe a bias score if bias is one of the big concerns.
Mhm.
You're being transparent, and then the user can choose to use that information or not. And then if you've got that feedback loop, they can provide their feedback as well.
Mm. Sort of a minimum trustworthy product, which I'm sure someone
Oh,
has thought of, but I would love to to run with that one.
I love that. I hadn't heard that before, but I'll probably steal it now.
Yeah, let's use it. Let's use it. Good
Yeah.
purposes. So you talk a lot also about users. Your background is in consumer insights. So I would be
Yes.
remiss if I didn't talk a little bit or allow you to talk a little bit about what that means because we hear there's lots of terms: user experience, customer insights, market insights. There's like a whole
Yes.
vocabulary that might obfuscate what that really is. So can you just tell us what consumer insights is and how it's influenced your work?
Sure. So I actually think about two terms because I actually worked in both areas. One is consumer insights and one is shopper insights, and they are not the same thing.
Mm. Mhm, mhm,
So, and my experience is really tied to both the consumer packaged goods space as well as food service restaurants. So very consumer focused areas, and it's really about when you're a brand selling a product, understanding not just what consumers are doing with the product and when they're purchasing it,
mhm.
but why they're doing those things
Hmm.
and really getting that human understanding of what's going on. So if you are um, creating a product, and let's say I worked in housewares for a little bit, so I
Mhm.
worked on Corel is one of the
Oh, okay.
products I worked on, right?
Mhm.
And so one of the things that we would get consumer insights on, and this is going to sound kind of funny, but dinnerware patterns. And
Huh,
we would
okay.
actually
Huh,
test which dinnerware patterns consumers liked because
interesting.
these were things that they were going to purchase. You don't purchase plates, dinnerware that often, and this
Mhm.
is going to be something that was going to be on your table for many years.
It's a big deal, a big
Right.
factor, a variable
Right.
in the decision process, sure.
Right.
Ah,
So we would test that and we would get quantitative information, but we'd also get qualitative information around, why and what they were going to do with it. Because one of the big things and reasons one of the reasons consumer insights were so important is, it wasn't just about you basically you couldn't just and you know this from the user research standpoint. You can't just ask consumers and users, what do you like? What are you going to do?
yeah, for
Because
sure.
they can't articulate it. Can't they can't really tell you why, and you have
Mhm.
to learn how to probe and dig. And so the work that I did was taking qualitative research from focus groups, one-on-ones, things like that, and marrying it with data, purchase data, menu data, just all sorts of different things to basically come in and tell a story and provide that to sales team to the product team to the marketing team to utilize to know how to talk to consumers about that product for advertising, for marketing. And then when you get into the shopper space, there's that difference between the person using the product, which is the consumer, but then the person who actually purchases the product, which is the shopper,
Okay. Got
right?
it.
So,
Mhm.
right. So yeah, like if you're thinking about like grocery shopping,
Mhm. Mhm.
and you're buying a razor. You might not
Mhm.
be buying that razor for yourself. It might be for somebody else in your household.
Yes, yes.
And all of a sudden, all these things come up in terms of you're the shopper making decisions for somebody else. And so
Mhm.
that's a
Mhm.
whole another science. And I think one of the fascinating things, and I'll not try not to dive too deeply into this, but one of the companies I worked at did a shopper life stages study
Oh,
because
okay.
for consumer packaged goods, most of the time you go to the grocery store and you're kind of on auto. Like,
Mhm.
autopilot, you know what you're going to buy, you know what brands. Sometimes something new comes out and you might check that out.
Mhm.
But, if you're buying ketchup, you're always buying typically the same brand of ketchup, or maybe you're always buying on price, but you're making that shopping decision the same way every single time. But if you're entering a new life stage, that's where you're doing additional research. And I think the big example is if you suddenly are having a baby, all of a
Yep.
sudden you're
That's what
buying a
I
whole
say.
bunch of new items that you never had to consider before, and you're stopping to do all of that extra research. And that's
Mhm.
where understanding that shopper behavior is really important because it's how you want to market to them, online, how you market to them in the aisle and
Mhm.
all of those different types of things. So they're
That's
very different
awesome.
disciplines, but they're very also tied together.
Understood. That's fascinating. I loved, in my marketing, days, in
Yes.
school, I loved learning about consumer behavior and the whole psychology of decision making. It's fascinating. We could do a whole other
Oh, yeah,
talk
no,
on that.
consumer behavior, I mean, that was my undergraduate degree, essentially, consumer science. It was
Yes,
all about
this is
consumer
why we get
behavior.
along. This is why we
Maybe.
bonded. Well, I'm going to, let folks know who may be listening if they have any questions, comments. Now would be a good time to enter them into the chat. But I am going to ask just a couple of questions to kind of round
Sure.
out the conversation. One, which I ask everybody, is we talked around it quite a bit, but how would you distill your definition of what responsible tech means?
Oh, responsible tech. Um, I mean, I think it's a bunch of things, and I think I've kind of talked to some of them.
Hmm.
But it's looking at things like transparency, how a system works, what its limits are, what it does, what it doesn't do, and then how it addresses a lot of these other things that I'm going to mention. Accountability, which is one of the things that we discuss. If there's something going wrong with the product, who's responsible for it? Who's accountable for it? Who's accountable for making sure that AI is actually providing the accurate information that it should provide? Things like understanding things like bias, um, and then, kind of the basic stuff that I think a lot of people might think of when you're talking about responsible AI. Do you have the basics down? Are you being compliant? Are you
Mm,
protecting user data? Protecting user privacy. And depending on the type of product, those things can become really important.
mhm,
Um, the other thing that I like to think of with responsible AI is the human element.
mm, mhm,
Are you thinking about how the human is going to be impacted by the AI tech? Can the AI make a decision without a human being there? So, actually, most of the AI enabled products I've worked on have human in the loop in one way or another to
awesome.
either address something ambiguous or to have that last piece of oversight before going to an end user. And all of that really ties to, I think, one of the things that I think is really important is that building trust piece. And I think all of that
Mhm.
is layered into responsible tech.
Yeah, agree. Yes, yes, love it. And
And I'm sure I forgot something,
I
but tell
sure.
me
I
what
mean,
else
it
I
is
love.
multifaceted, but I'm always curious how people kind of translate it in their minds. And my definition changes over time and over conversations like
Absolutely.
this. So that's a good thing. All right, I don't see questions at this time. So, Raina, could you share? Oh, Russ Clay. I know Russ. Hello, Russ. He is wonderful. He says, given your background in consumer science and approach to product strategy,
Yep.
how much do you feel that AI needs to conform to the tried and true strategies that we've known for years? And how much do you think AI is upending slash changing those entrenched strategies? Thanks for the question.
Oh, it's a good question. I mean, I think I mean, it's gonna depend, and I know that's a big
That's a
answer.
researcher answer right there.
Right, right. I think it's going to depend because some of those, like, tried and true things that you know about consumer behavior, that stuff you still need to pay attention to when you're having an AI do things and make decisions, but, I think technology has evolved over time, and consumer behavior changes with that
Mm,
technology.
mm.
I mean, a few years ago, who would have imagined people having entire conversations or actual relationships with chatbots? I
Well,
mean,
there you
that's
go. Interesting.
a thing. So you have to kind
Mm,
of step back and think about what problem you're trying to solve. Um, I think the trick is if you're keeping humans in the loop, you're not going to lose some of those core things. But it really just depends. And it becomes like if I think about it like and I'm not that entrenched in this space, but when you think about health tech and AI helping doctors make decisions, that's behavior that's actually really new. And that's a behavior that's going to be different for a doctor because now they're looking at what the AI is recommending, and the AI may catch things that a human couldn't catch.
mm,
Um, and then you're thinking about, well, how does the consumer or user respond to that? And it's building that trust because it's so new. They might be excited
mm,
because the AI is now catching things the doctor
mhm,
didn't catch before, or they just may not trust any of it because it's AI. So it's really it comes down to the individual situation. I think you have to keep those historical approaches in mind, but consumer behavior evolves over time. So if you're making decisions based on how consumers thought of things back in the 50s and the 60s in the heyday of consumer marketing, you're probably going to miss things.
mm,
I think, personalization has really become important in the
mm,
last, 15, 20 years with the advent of the internet. And if you're not customizing for your user, that could be a huge miss, particularly in the consumer area. That's an area that's really, really growing and growing even further because AI enables that personalization.
very interesting. And Russ says he loved your example, and that was his main project when he worked in healthcare. So, yeah,
Okay, excellent.
yeah. And Russ himself has a background in psychology, and this makes me also wonder a bit about, what aspects of human behavior are more static and more fluid. So, like, kind of at the consumer behavior level, like I think your example of relationships with chatbots and personalization. Yes, there's some movement there, but what kind of basic human needs is that addressing? Is that a more
Yeah,
stable area? It's interesting, and to your point, it depends and it's nuanced. So,
exactly.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, but like I've even applied like Maslow's hierarchy, the
yeah.
your needs,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
And you think about like I've applied it to how I approach product for specific analytics products.
Oh,
And he sort of gave
interesting.
me, with the VP of analytics that I worked with, he had
Hmm.
actually put together a, a pyramid
Yeah.
about the analytics solutions and what different pieces of analytics can provide where. And when you get to the top, that's where you could do some of the really, really interesting things with analytics and AI in terms of, using it to predict things and, help
Yeah.
versus just reporting on what you already know, which is a lower in the needs. So it had
That's
like the equivalent, but
fascinating.
yeah. It
Okay,
was a
Raina,
really
we're going to
cool
talk.
framework.
We're going to talk a little bit more how we get to self-actualization through data. That's like a
There you go.
fantastic kind of thing. And then since I don't see other questions, I'm going to ask one that's just kind of occurred to me in thinking about human in the loop, because you talked a lot about the
Yeah.
importance of that for trust, but it is so contextual. I was thinking about your healthcare example, where the frequency perhaps where a human needs to be involved might be greater than maybe some other, I don't know, conversational chatbots
Yeah.
for different purposes. So I'm wondering if I just had this question from an executive this week. So,
Okay.
wondering like, yeah, where do we put humans in the loop? Do you have like a framework or a way to guide people as to like, here's the spots in the workflow? Is it kind of risk-based? I'm just curious how you might tackle the right places and frequency of those moments.
Yeah, and again, it's all dependent on
Mm-hmm.
the situation, the industry. So I think a lot of that is risk based, and it's trust based. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's a combination of the two. So I'm gonna have probably I would recommend more human checkpoints in health tech or insurance tech
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
than I might in just making marketing suggestions for ideas for marketing campaigns.
Yeah.
So I think that, or it's kind of like if you're thinking about the tech itself, where is the tech struggling? And
Mm.
does it need a human to help with that? So
Mm-hmm.
I'll go back to my moderation example because this was a real situation where we had two observations, a safety alert and what was it? Safe. Now I forgot it. It was a safety alert and safety concern.
Uh-huh.
And those are two different things. And typically, a human historically had evaluated it was very nuanced. Well, we
Hmm.
were having trouble training the AI and the machine learning to be able to differentiate between the two. So it could identify that it was something with safety,
Ah.
but it couldn't actually differentiate between trust and concern. So
Oh.
that's where we would bring a human in to make that final call.
Mm-hmm.
And we built that product just as generative AI was launching. So I always wonder, could we have added another layer in there and had a generative AI model now using
Mm.
some natural language processing
Mm-hmm.
and just some historical behavior to make that decision? But then you'd probably still want to do a little bit of human in the loop. Um,
Yeah.
but I think it's just really a combination of the two. So, or three really, the tech,
Mm-hmm.
um, trust and risk. I was trying to
Yes.
remember what the
Yeah.
first one
No, I'm
was.
gonna think more on that. Well, Raina, you've given me a lot to think about. I'm sure others who catch this now or later will feel the same. How can people get in touch with you if they would like to explore any of this in more detail?
Sure. The best way to get in touch with me is just to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm on there a lot these days. My name is unique enough that you put my name in, you should be able to find me.
1 month 40. There you
Yes.
go. Great. Well, I hope people will take advantage of that because, as I say, I think you put a lot of great food for thought out there based on really like lived experience, and I think that
Sure.
makes the world a difference. And I appreciate you, and I appreciate you advocating for trust in technology. It's sorely needed, and it's achievable. You just have to
Yeah.
set your mind to it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks everyone for
All
joining.
right.
Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.